for Mum, one for Dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be in Australia.
Dead, buried, cremated.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money Summer Special Series. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. If you're taking a break this summer, but like me, you can't get enough of politics, then we are here to help, giving you the best of from the Australia Institute's popular Politics in the Pub and other events from 2018. How did the big banks get away with so much for so long? Why are so many aged care residents malnourished? And when did arms manufacturers start sponsoring the Australian War Memorial? In his passionate quarterly essay, Dead Right, Australia Institute Chief Economist Richard Dennis explores what neoliberalism has done to Australian society. For decades, we've been led to believe that the private sector does everything better, that governments can't afford to provide the high-quality services they once did, but that security and prosperity for all are just around the corner. In fact, Australians are now less equal. Millions of workers have no sick leave or paid holidays, and housing is unaffordable for many, particularly young people. Deregulation, privatisation, and trickle-down economics have, we are told, delivered us 27 years of economic growth. But to what end? This audio was recorded live at Politics in the Pub on the 20th of June 2018 at the ANU Pop-Up Village Bar.
I've got some good news for you, at least. The whole thesis of my essay is that neoliberalism is dead. But if this was a whodunit, there's a bit of a twist at the end, because basically I'm arguing that it was the right that killed neoliberalism. And, you know, Ebony said we got the timing right in writing the essay. I wish. I've been saying this for 25 years. But a broken clock is right twice a day. And finally, I think I got the timing right. But I mean it. Neoliberalism is dead. There is not a single federal parliamentarian who, in principle, is opposed to subsidies. There is not a single federal parliamentarian who, in principle, is opposed to regulation. Not one. Matt Canavan wants to spend billions of dollars subsidising new coal mines. I want to spend billions of dollars subsidising dental care. So Matt Canavan and I are as one. No, don't laugh. This is important. We both agree that subsidies are a great way for a country to get more of what it wants. He thinks that we want more coal mines. I think we want more dental care, aged care, public transport, nice long list. But there is no ideological disagreement between me and Minister Canavan. We both agree subsidies work. We both agree Australia's rich enough to subsidise things it want more of. We just have to have an old-fashioned democratic conversation about what it is we want more of. More coal mines or more dentists. Tony Abbott wants to nationalise the coal-fired power generators. Tony Abbott and I are as one. I can think of a whole bunch of things I want to nationalise. The fact that I disagree with him that we should buy loss-making power stations at the end of their life, that's a quibble. Because Tony and Abbott and I both agree that nationalising things is a perfectly legitimate, important democratic tool. Now, sure, he's a tool, right, but let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the fact that Matt Canavan thinks subsidies work and Tony Abbott thinks nationalising things work, and neoliberalism is stone cold dead. David Leyonhjelm, the alleged ultra-libertarian, he wants to regulate windmills. Right? How can an ultra-libertarian want to regulate things? The point is that none of them actually believe in neoliberalism anymore. Maybe some of them never did. Some of them clearly used to. But let's be clear, at the moment in Australia, we've got conservatives who say they support free trade, saying they want to end the live sheep exports. Fantastic. They want to regulate trade. They want to regulate trade. I want to regulate trade. This is great, we agree. There is no free traders, right? We just need to have a democratic debate about what we want to regulate. So really what I'm arguing in the essay is that the term neoliberalism, what is neoliberalism? That set of small government principles that the smaller the government, the more efficient a society, the smaller the government, the more equitable a society. Those principles, no one actually subscribes to them anymore within the right of Australian politics. Or look at Brexit, hardly free trade, or Donald Trump. So all around the world, neoliberalism has kind of been abandoned by the right. And what I'm saying to people who perhaps like me have kind of, raged against it for a long, long time is let's not miss something really important. They've moved on. When we take away their ism, when we take away their alleged principles, all that's left is the Wizard of Oz without the curtain. All that's left is some people saying we can afford to spend public money on coal mines and we can't afford to spend public money on the NDIS. They pretend that we shouldn't regulate the banks, but they love regulating the unions. Now this is important, right? They don't have an ism. They're just a bunch of old-fashioned vested interest rent seekers shoveling our money onto their friends and punching their enemies in the face. All right, that's all. And when we call them ideologues, we're flattering them unfairly. Right? We're suggesting they have some principle. But if, and it's a big if they were worried about the burden of red tape and regulation, then why do they want to regulate charities? Why do they want to regulate unions? And the simple answer is because they love regulating their enemies. It's not complicated. And, people like myself have been, arguing the ideas and the evidence behind neoliberalism for decades. And, I guess I've got to the point, it's just like arguing with the drunk uncle at Christmas. Like, good, but we're just going to laugh at them. All right, they're that weak now. Now, when I say they're that weak, I mean their ideas are that weak. There's a trick in the title because dead right, the right's not dead, but neoliberalism is. Okay, the right are clearly powerful in Australia. They're in government, all right? They're making life hard for unions, charities and refugees right now. So the right aren't dead. The right are a long way from dead, but their simple idea that they've allegedly sort of signed up to, that they want to lower taxes for everybody, they want to cut spending on everything, and they want to reduce regulation on everything. That simple idea is rubbish, it's gone. They love giving public subsidies to private health insurance. They love giving subsidies to private schools. They love giving subsidies to coal mines, and they pretend to have a principled opposition to subsidies for renewable energy. We don't have to argue about their ism. We just have to remind the public that, well, if we're rich enough, after 27 years of continuous economic growth, if we're rich enough to waste money subsidising coal mines, how come we can't spend more on schools? We don't actually have to win an ideological battle with these people because they don't have an ideology anymore. They just have some vested interests they like, they have some cultural enemies they hate, and it's pretty obvious what they're doing. So to wrap up, we're lucky to live in one of the richest countries in the world at the richest point in world history. It's a great problem to have. But after 27 years of economic growth, we can't afford, apparently, to do things we could afford to do 27 years ago. Neoliberalism didn't make our country poorer, it just made a lot of us poorer. All right, it's undermined. It's undermined the institutions that we once took for granted, the culture that we once took for granted, and it's changed our society in powerful and radical ways. But the idea that there is no alternative, that there is no choice, well, it's easy to win that argument with them now. We just have to quote themselves back at them all the time. There's plenty of money for tax cuts, but there's no money for health or education. That's bullshit. Right? Everyone knows it. the public know it. They can, they struggle to mount any of these arguments now. So we have a lot of political work to do. We have a lot of talking to each other to do, but we don't have to, I think, rage against neoliberalism anymore. In fact, I think we just need to stop talking a bit about it and instead just rage against rampant hypocrisy.
The way that we talk about it and the way that neoliberalism has, for better or worse, approached politics and the way that they talk about politics has really changed our culture.
Yeah, can I quote from the book? It's always a worry, isn't it? Author grabs his book to read to you. But I don't want to quote me, I want to quote Margaret Thatcher. Because it's all actually a big part of the book. I haven't talked about it here tonight, but a big part of it is actually about that, is culture. This is Margaret Thatcher in 1981. So she's referring in this quote to post-World War II England. What's irritated me about the direction of politics in the last 30 years is it's always been towards the collectivist society. That irritated her. Right? Now think about what happened. World War II, Europe's just been decimated, right? Literally bombed to destruction. And people kind of wanted to work together to fix it. And that irritated Margaret. Now, this is really important. Right after World War II, England came up with a national health system, the first universal free health system. Their debt to GDP at the time was 150 or something %. Right? They were poorer than they'd ever been. And what they thought they should do after World War II was kind of say, no matter who you are and how poor you are, how about everyone could have health care? Right? Because they'd just gone through a war. And that irritated Margaret. People have forgotten about the personal society and they say, do I count? Do I matter? To which the short answer is yes. And therefore, it isn't that I set out on economic policies. It's that I set out really to change the approach. And changing the economics is the means of changing the approach. If you change the approach, you're really after the heart and soul of the nation. Economics are the method. The object is to change the heart and the soul. Neoliberalism was never about economics. It was about changing the heart and soul of a nation so that Margaret wasn't irritated by all of those people thinking they could solve problems working together. That irritated her. But she didn't just change England. She changed Australia, she changed the Western-speaking world in particular. So yeah, I write a lot about culture in here as well and how neoliberalism was a tool of cultural change, a highly successful one, but hey, let's be optimists. Margaret Thatcher set out to change the world and she did it. So maybe you can too.
Speaking of the national health system, one other thing in the essay that really kind of shocked me, and I might do a show of hands shortly, who's heard of the Westpac rescue helicopter? Hands up. Yeah. So, Richard, tell us a little bit about the Westpac rescue helicopter.
Well, there's a great ad on television, father and son pretending to drown because they're actors. Helicopter comes in, big Westpac W underneath the helicopter, and the voiceover says, even though they don't bank with Westpac, we're there for them. Which is fucking great. Because it's actually funded by the New South Wales taxpayer. It is not funded by Westpac. Westpac have the naming rights to the New South Wales Ambulance Service rescue helicopter. In the same way that Suncorp didn't build Suncorp Stadium, which used to be called Lang Park and was built and paid for by Queensland taxpayers, we've come as a society through neoliberalism to be told that we're so poor that we can't afford to have our rescue helicopter service anymore, but the banks can give us one, and we can't afford to build stadiums where people can go and enjoy themselves without thanking our sponsors who made it possible. And indeed our war memorial, built in 1941 during World War II, we had a bid on at the time, but we thought back then we could afford to build our own war memorial. We thought we could afford to build one in 1941, but we don't think we can afford to run one anymore. That's why we need corporate sponsorship. And we thank our corporate sponsors. We thank them for installing the eternal flame in the pond of reflection. That was brought to you by the Australian Gas Association. I'm not joking. Go read the plaque. And we thank Origin for giving us the gas to burn in the eternal flame, because we couldn't have done it without them, really. We couldn't have afforded to build the whole thing without them. And in that pond of reflection, around the pond of reflection, there's 102,000 names of men and women who died fighting for Australia. And all of their names are in the same size font, because the design feature of the War Memorial was that no ranks are mentioned on that wall, no rank, and that everyone's in the same font, because all men, and they did say men, all men were equal in death, except the sponsors, who get bigger font. Lest we forget our sponsors, the War Memorial in Australia, anything the right should be willing to put above money, you would think would be a war memorial. The War Memorial pretends that it's open and a wonderful building because of corporate sponsorship, in the same way that Westpac lie to you and suggest that it's their generosity that rescue actors. All right? So neoliberalism has not just changed our culture, it's changed our sense of what government can do. And the beautiful thing is that while corporates love to put their logo on our rescue helicopters or on our hospitals or on our war memorials, when we have privately owned tollways, they keep their logo off the tollway. No, they're not stupid. They want you angry at government for tolls, and they want you thanking them for rescue.
Hi, I hope you're right about neoliberalism, but I just read about Domino's filling potholes in America on the roads, and I have a horrible feeling that could happen in this country, and it, again, would be sold as a good thing. It was your talk about the Westpac helicopter. I mean, do you think we could end up going down that road before things turn around?
Well, first and foremost, we have to kind of ask ourselves what's important, what we need more of, what we need less of, and what I think we need more of is companies that are willing to pay their tax and pay their workers fairly. If corporate Australia wants to make a contribution to Australia, I'd start there. And again, if you go to the War Memorial, in the entrance hall, the first thing you'll see is the ads to the weapons manufacturers, Boeing, BAE, Thales. But as you walk around the opening, the entrance hall, you'll find the portrait of the general who led Australia's troops in the Kokoda track. And right next to his portrait and his life story is an ad for BHP that dwarfs him. And of course, BHP are currently, the ATO are chasing them for more than $1 billion in unpaid taxes. So, yeah, look, I probably care less about the Domino's pizza pothole fixing than I do about the rescue helicopter or the War Memorial. But I think we are being conned into letting these companies pretend to be good corporate citizens for a fraction of the price of actually paying the tax that they should pay. And I think that's obscene.
Richard, I was going to ask, shouldn't we take account of some of the legacies of economic rationalism in the way it has socially engineered our society so that there are more richer people, and sometimes fewer of them, but they're way more powerful. And an example I'd just like to give is the private equity phenomenon, whereby small groups of very rich individuals purchase a company and they get the company to go in a hock for their purchase of that company, which results in that company having to not only produce a profit but also service that debt, which means squeezing the workers harder and therefore a more hardline industrial relations to affect that. So, I'm thinking of effects of economic rationalism, and not to mention that, even more powerful rich people.
Look, unfortunately, there's no doubt that capitalism is invented to encourage and facilitate greed. Greed is good, apparently. And when you tell people that, and when you reward them for doing it, you see the kind of things that we see in Australia and around the world today. But I guess what I would say is that inequality isn't, capitalism drives inequality. There's no doubt about that. And, Piketty took far too many pages to make that point, but it's a good book nonetheless. But when we tell ourselves that the market drives inequality, we leave out a very important story. The Parliament right this week is debating whether to provide big tax cuts to rich people. That's not the market. That's us. No, it's not government, it's us. It's the Australian Parliament. They're our representatives about to go and cause some inequality. So if we pass those tax cuts, we'll cause some inequality. If we pass the company tax cuts, we'll cause some more inequality. And if we close tax concessions for superannuation and we close tax concessions for dividend imputation credits and we fix capital gains tax concessions, we'll reduce inequality. So don't get me wrong, capitalism is designed to generate inequality, but it's the myth to say that we can't do anything about it. And that again is key to what I'm saying in the essay, is that one of neoliberalism's best trick is to tell us there's nothing we can do about it. There is no alternative. These are sort of forces of nature that can't be resisted. Well, I disagree. One vote in the Senate today and we would have been a less unequal society in the future. So yes, we can regulate capitalism, but we're in charge of the tax system and we can use it effectively if we want to.
If liberalism is dead in the West, would you say it's lively or sick in the global South?
Look, that's a very interesting question. I mean, the Washington Consensus is the term used to sort of describe the set of neoliberal policies, free trade, tax cuts, privatisation, that were pushed by the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD. The Washington Consensus was imposed on the global South for decades and caused enormous income inequality within those countries, but did very little to close the gap between the income of the poor countries and the income of the rich countries. So is neoliberalism dead in the global South? No. It's still being pushed on them by countries that have rejected it themselves. So, Donald Trump has clearly repudiated neoliberalism. He's a protectionist. The UK has gone with Brexit. They've clearly tried to shut themselves off from the other things they fear. Yet both the UK and the US are still effectively supporting, endorsing and sometimes demanding that far poorer countries than their own continue with this experiment that they themselves has rejected. So, look, it's not my area of expertise, but no, I don't think it's dead there, not because the communities want it, but because powerful people who've abandoned it in their own countries still seem determined to push it on them. It's horrible.
You said at the beginning that neoliberalism is dead, but is there an ideological divide still at work? And also, given your argument that it's a matter of choice as to which things we want to favour, is there a space for rational argument, or is there something else at work, namely irrationality on one side of the argument?
Yeah, gee, we've come a long way when the left criticises the right for not being rational enough, haven't we? I'm sticking to my thesis. I think neoliberalism is dead in Australia. I can't find a powerful proponent of it. What is the ideology of the coalition? I think the reason they're having so many internal and external problems is they don't have one. They don't have a cohesive, defining set of principles that they might tinker with for pragmatic reasons but generally unite them. Now, as is often the case in Australia, I like to blame Barnaby Joyce for this. Because to the extent that the coalition, and we call it the coalition, which doesn't help us remember that the Liberals are really quite different from the Nationals, the Liberal National coalition have kind of played this double game with the electorate for decades, and that is tell everyone in the cities that we're broke and we can't afford to invest in services or infrastructure, and tell everybody that governments can't solve problems, and then go to the National Party seats and shovel public money onto them. But the quid quo pro, the deal was that the Nationals got the cash, but they shut up about it. No, this just go have a look, and whether it was Mark Vaile or Tim Fish or all of them, in public they were all like, yes, no, tough times, no money for the unemployed, no money at all. And then in their local paper it's like, woohoo, did you see all the money we got? But of course Barnaby came along and just couldn't shut up. Really, it's pretty much as simple as this, waving his arms around saying, look what I got. I got 10 billion for the inland rail. What about Sydney's rail? Stuff them! He drags the APVMA to his electorate and says, yeah, that's how powerful I am. Check that out. So the Nationals never went along with neoliberalism. When the New South Wales Liberal government privatised the energy distribution network, they privatised it everywhere except regional Australia. So the Nationals have never believed in neoliberalism, and the Liberals have never forced it upon them, but historically the Nationals didn't rub the Liberals' face in it. And then, of course, Barnaby came along and couldn't help bragging, but also was worried enough about One Nation that he felt he had to brag. So, yeah, no, I think it's stone cold dead, and the coalition now can't get a simple message out. Because on the one hand, we've got a budget emergency, but boy, let's spend $200 billion on tax cuts. Or we don't think government should intervene in markets except for private health insurance, private schools and coal-fired power stations and anyone else we like. They can't tell a story anymore. I'm just saying everything's driven by self-interest. That's exactly what I'm saying. No, but that's my point. It doesn't help us to call it an ideology. Right? And I mean, you can't even use a class narrative, because if they're on the side of capital, why do they hate the renewable energy capitalists so much? They're not even on the side of capital. They're on the side of the bits of capital they like.
I'd like you to comment on the $257 million additional dollars allocated to bring it up to about $1 billion for the chaplaincy program in schools, and how that fits in with your thesis.
Yeah, pretty nicely, thanks, Dirk. Let's never forget that Kevin Andrews, that other erstwhile neoliberal, the minute he got his hands on some cabinet power, he went off and invented a subsidy scheme for marriage advice. $250 million worth of subsidised marriage advice. And the scheme was designed so badly. I think you got about $250 for some marriage counselling. He's worried about divorce, because he cares about your relationships because he's not a liberal, right? No, a libertarian wouldn't care if you got divorced. He's not a libertarian. He didn't want people to get divorced, and he wanted them to go and get marriage counselling, and he wanted to use your money to subsidise marriage counselling. And the scheme was designed so badly that you could get $250 for marriage counselling. So people set up online counselling services where for $250 they'd counsel you online, and then there'd be a $125 refund. Think about it, $250 of taxpayers' money comes in, the counsellor gets half, you get half. All right, this is how idiotic the so-called neoliberals were when it came to spending public money. But it didn't matter, because he liked spending money on that. And similarly with the chaplaincy program, they like spending money on that, but they don't like the church that they're giving that money to. They don't want them to pay tax. Right? But here's the thing, it's a democracy. We can be as dumb as we want. Right? There's no, this is important. Not that we be dumb, but that we understand. There's no mention of evidence in the Constitution. There's no mention of cost-benefit analysis. We give incredible power to our constitutionally elected governments to spend money on whatever the hell they want. And then if we don't like them, we have to boot them out. So it's okay that they get in and spend money on their friends. Okay? They're not breaking the law. They're just wasting money. But the irony is that while they've been wasting money, they've been talking about the inefficiency of government, right? And the need to reduce public spending while shoveling public money onto their friends. And again, if we stop focusing on the ism and just out them for wasting money on crazy stuff, I think we'd shift a lot more votes than criticising them for philosophy they don't subscribe to anymore.
I'll premise this by saying I'm not a pessimist, but I really don't think neoliberalism is dead at all. I think that a lot of people were saying a very similar thing 10 years ago, and obviously the event that caused the sort of pronouncements of the death of neoliberalism then was the GFC. But I think what you saw in response to that were huge government bailouts, propping up, the banks that were too big to fail. You had huge, the more repressive wings of the state as well intervened into people's lives by breaking up strikes, forcing through wage decreases, forcing through mass sackings, things like that. But that didn't end neoliberalism. That only saw an increase in privatisation, an increase in cutting social services, an increase in, of shaping the economy around the profit motive. So I think that actually touches on something which I kind of disagree a bit with your analysis of neoliberalism, which is that if someone says that they want the state to subsidise something, that means they're against neoliberalism. I actually think the history of neoliberalism has always come with heavy state intervention. That was Thatcher building up an army of police officers to break the British miners' strike. So I actually think the task for the left remains to build an alternative to neoliberalism, because I still think that ideologically both major parties in Australia support it. So I think there's still a project to build an alternative to neoliberalism, and that's where I'm an optimist, because I think all around the world you see the collapse of the centre. So I want to know what you think about opportunities that it provides the left to actually build an alternative to neoliberalism. So I agree with you, I think we should nationalise positive things, but how is that actually going to happen? Because I think it's more than just a democratic dialogue that needs to happen around that.
Well, obviously, I disagree. So Gladys Berejiklian is renowned for being the sort of ultimate privatiser in New South Wales, and that's not true. She recently bought a football stadium. She nationalised the ANZ stadium, spent $200 million buying it back. So the public sector built the stadium for the Olympics. After the public sector built it, they sold it. And she recently bought it back so that she can spend another $1 billion doing it up. And then maybe selling it again. But let's be clear, is the ultimate privatiser? Well, she's not. She's a nationaliser of things she likes, football stadiums, and she's a privatiser of things she doesn't like. New South Wales Treasury, are into competition and competition policy, so much so that they've imposed it on the aged care sector and the disability sector, and domestic violence support centres are subject to competition. They have to compete with each other. But New South Wales Treasury privatised Port Botany in a way that ensured it will never face competition from another port. So to call them neoliberal is to flatter them unfairly. They privatise things they hate and they nationalise things they like. So I'm not saying post-GFC there wasn't still a lot of privatisation. There was. But that doesn't mean that the people doing it were part of a consistent ideology. They're just simple. As I said, they help their friends and they punch their enemies. In terms of alternatives, look, I wrote about that in Curing Affluenza. I mean, during the GFC, so many people said to me, "Oh, Richard, if only there was an alternative to the private for-profit evil global banks." I'm like, what, like credit unions? No, something owned by the people. What, like credit unions? No, something harder than that. It's got to be harder than that. If you bank with the big four rather than the credit union or a building society, then don't complain. Don't complain about the big banks. I don't know why you're clapping. Most people weren't. You saw that, didn't you? All right. So there are alternatives. There are alternatives. Anglicare and Uniting Care, two aged care providers in Australia, employ far more people than the coal industry in Australia. 60,000 people work in Anglicare and Uniting Care. It's not a for-profit business. Credit unions and building societies provide all the same financial services as the big four banks at lower prices. And a whole bunch of lefties I know still bank with the Commonwealth. So we're surrounded by alternatives and we don't even grab the ones that are right in front of us.
In terms of alternatives, what do you think of the universal basic income?
I could write a whole essay about the universal basic income. I only touch on it in this one. For me, it falls between big enough to spend my life on and not achievable enough to spend my week on. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. So if I was going to bite off a big problem to fight, I'd prioritise climate change, and I have. At the same time, if I was going to try and drive some change to make Australia a fairer place tomorrow, I'd bust a gut on the tax bill before the Senate right now. For me, universal basic income is interesting. I'm not opposed to the idea, but for me it's not big enough to think that's the most important thing I could work on, and it's not achievable enough to think that's the urgent thing I should work on. But to those who do, more power to you. But you can actually get to a universal basic income in some pretty simple incremental steps. If, and it's a big if, people believe in the principle of the universal basic income, it means that everyone gets a grant from the state regardless of their circumstance. So you could move towards a universal basic income by increasing the unemployment benefit to the level of the age pension. That'd be a nice start. It's not a UBI, but I'd go for that. But after 20 years, we haven't seen one real increase in the unemployment benefit. So if after 20 years we haven't got the unemployment benefit up, personally, I reckon the chances of that now are very low. So, yeah, not opposed to it, but I don't think it's the only thing we need to do to fix capitalism, and I think it's a really hard thing to get up in the short term. So the ruthless pragmatist in me says, I hope you do it.
My question is really something that you said towards the end. We're talking about that there's no need to attack neoliberalism anymore, that we just need to attack hypocrisy. And yet you've used the word capitalism a few times in the discussion, and my question really comes back to that really it's not the hypocrisy. I think it's capitalism and the class divide that really makes the issues. I didn't agree when you began by saying that you and Matt Canavan had anything in common. I think you're doing yourself a massive disservice there. That the whole idea that he wants to subsidise coal and you want to subsidise dental care, I think it makes more sense if we look not at you versus him, but what class forces are behind him, major bosses, the more important bosses than renewable bosses at the moment. That's why they don't care about them. They weigh less. And on the other hand, the people that need dental care, working class people. So my question really is that is there, in my view there is, but I'm an old school Marxist, so why wouldn't I say this? But I'm interested in your opinion about the question about the class divide, and in particular, one of the main things that faces it at the moment in terms of inequality, which is wages are bloody stagnant. And the main reason for that, I reckon, is that there aren't enough people in unions, and more important than that, there aren't enough bloody strikes.
It's true, and the Treasurer agrees with you. I'm not sure what his solution is, but Scott Morrison is predicting quite rapid wage growth. Every union I speak to, and I speak to a few, I say, have you written to the Treasurer and asked him to support your current wage claim? Because there's only one way for wages to go up nationally, and that would be for wages to go up nationally. So you can't predict that wages are going to go up, and you can't predict rising government revenue because wages are going to go up when you oppose every wage increase. So I'm not kidding. Every union that's pushing for a wage rise should write to the Treasurer and say, I saw your budget, that's interesting. I'm here to help, trying to help you achieve your forecasts, Treasurer. And I reckon a letter from you would actually kind of help. Now, there's only two options. He either agrees with you or doesn't, and I reckon you win either way. Or he ignores you and proves he's a coward. So, of course, wage growth is very low in Australia at the moment for most people. Wages for high-income earners are doing quite well. Of course, union density and the right to strike has a big effect on that. Australia has the most anti-strike, anti-union laws in the developed world, arguably in the world. All right, so this is new. We didn't used to do that. We used to be the land of the sickie and the smoko and the long weekend, and neoliberalism came and changed that for us. So, yeah, you're right to be frustrated about that. But again, I thank you for defending my honour, but no, me and Matt Canavan, we are as one. We both agree subsidies work. The right have said for years subsidies are inefficient and don't work. That's a lie. private health insurance, private schools, anything they like, they've always subsidised. We say, can we subsidise renewable energy? No, it's terrible, it'd kill the economy. Right, we're just having a democratic argument about whether we want more wind turbines or whether we want more private hospitals. To pretend that that's a philosophy or an ideology, I don't agree. Doesn't mean they don't have friends and maybe even class friends. But remember, they hate the capitalists that own AGL. Right? They hate AGL. All right? Because AGL is saying, well, I don't want to spend my capital building a new power station in the last 50 years. That's crazy. I don't want to waste my capital on your political folly. So again, to say they're always on the side of capital, I think is misplaced. They're always on the side of their friends, but that's different, from always being on one particular side. As for sort of the role of the state and working people, again, people in National Party seats experience quite a different thing.
What does the death of neoliberalism mean for the development of a strategy to address the attainment of universal health care in this country? You've spoken in favour of a universal dental care scheme, against the subsidy of private health insurance schemes, but there's a much bigger problem of co-payments required just for the accessing of basic primary health care and even some hospital care services. During the week there was talk about breast cancer diagnosis leading to out-of-pocket costs of up to $10,000 to $20,000 for people. So can you talk about what the death of neoliberalism means for addressing those problems?
Yeah, so the death of neoliberalism doesn't mean we're all going to get what we want tomorrow. My point with saying neoliberalism is dead is the assertion that there's a coherent set of principles at play that guide the way we develop policy in Australia. Those principles are gone. Now, when it comes to universal health, I talk about that specifically in the essay. I compare our health system unfavourably to that of many European systems that are far more universal. Look, again, but I would say these are just simple democratic choices. Neoliberalism has trained us, maybe not you, but perhaps the person sitting next to you, neoliberalism has trained us to think that if we give things away, people will waste them. If we don't charge co-payments, other people, not you, other people can't be trusted, to use them well. We're terrified of giving a cent too much to a poor person. Neoliberalism has trained us to think it's efficient to impose all this stuff on people, but it's a cultural choice. And plenty of other countries make the cultural choice that we made more in the 80s and 90s, and that was, far more widely available universal health. So there's plenty of evidence to suggest it works, it's good for the health system. And more importantly, I think there's plenty of evidence to say that, strangely, tax concessions and subsidies for aromatherapy have done little to take pressure off the public hospital budget.
No.
I mean, who'd have thought? All right. So whether it's subsidies for superannuation or subsidies for private health insurance or subsidies for private schools, there's overwhelming evidence that says it hasn't actually taken pressure, in inverted commas, off the public system. It hasn't worked. But let's not get confused about why we keep doing it. It wasn't supposed to work. Right? It was just about subsidising things that powerful people wanted. So we have to win a democratic debate about, is that a good idea? Part of it's a technocratic debate, but the main thing, I think, is just a democratic debate. Of all the things to spend tens of billions of dollars on, is that a good idea? But there's a lot of change to get a system back to that. Thatcher and others have pushed us a long way away from it.
I thought it was amazing how quickly they dropped the idea of extending or broadening the GST once we suggested they put it on private health and private education.
Oh, but just on that, everybody raised a really important point. Every time someone says, let's increase the GST, say, yeah, we'll put it on private schools. And watch them shut up. And that's what we did a couple of years ago. Oh, we need to broaden the base by putting it on fresh food. Maybe. What about private schools? Oh, no. Right, again, they're hypocrites. They don't mean it. When you play them on that terrain, they don't know what to say.
Do you think neoliberalism ever was in Australia, or do you think they just trademarked it to justify their actions?
Look, great question. I did a launch in Melbourne a couple of nights ago with Don Watson, Keating's former speechwriter, wrote Recollections of a Bleeding Heart. And when I was saying there's no neoliberals around these days, he was adamant that when he worked in Keating's office, he was surrounded by true believers. So I do think that back in the 80s and 90s, there really was a club of people who genuinely kind of philosophically, intellectually and politically believed in all that stuff. Now, I think they were misguided, but I don't think all of them were evil. And I say in the essay, this is really important. Once upon a time, we collectively owned two airlines, an international airline called Qantas and a domestic airline called Australian. And I don't actually think that it would be a great idea for us still to own an airline. Neoliberalism said, what do we own an airline for? Indeed, what do we own two airlines for? And if we're going to own two airlines, wouldn't it make sense to merge them into one so you could fly domestically and international on the one ticket? So it's not like everything done in the name of neoliberalism was a crap idea. Like, we can haggle over which bits we liked and which bits we hate, but some of it was fine. So I think there used to be, to answer your question, I think there used to be people who genuinely, sincerely believed that the less government did, the richer and happier we'd all be. But I think it became obvious pretty fast that that was a really stupid idea. And I don't believe that anyone in a position of power in Australia today believes it anymore. I think, like the Wizard of Oz, they just are hiding a weak hand behind an edifice. And yeah, I think that all that is now is a cloak that hides the fact that they give money to their friends and they take it from their enemies. And if we confront the populace with that, I think we'll shift a lot of votes and maybe shift a lot of policy.
That's the final episode of Follow the Money's Summer Special Series, brought to you by the Australia Institute. A very big thank you to Richard Dennis. You can find Richard on Twitter at rdns_tai. The Australia Institute is at the Oz Institute with an AUS. And you can find me at Ebony_Bennett with a NNT. The quarterly essay Dead Right is available at quarterlyessay.com.au and from all good bookstores. If you live in Canberra or are visiting and want to see one of our Politics in the Pub events, you can sign up to our mailing list at tai.org.au. Listen free to Follow the Money wherever you download your favourite podcasts. Politics in the Pub is recorded live by Clayton McDonald, and this episode was produced by Jennifer Macy with additional editing by Lizzie Jack. Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum composed our title track, and you can find more of his music at pulseandthrum.com. Thanks for listening. But please stay tuned, because the next season of Follow the Money will begin soon.